Be honest. What's the cruelest thing someone's ever done to you? Now imagine. You're in labor, screaming in pain, and your husband and his mother lock you out. Can you feel that betrayal cutting deep? Don't look away. Like, share, and subscribe, because this truth will shake you to your core. I pressed one hand against my belly, sweat beading across my forehead as another contraction ripped through me like a violent wave. My hospital bag dangled from my shoulder. My knuckles turned white as I gripped the iron gate of our house in Austin, Texas. It was midnight. My water had broken 30 minutes earlier. I should have been inside, lying on the bed Daniel and I shared, calling for him to grab the car keys. But instead, I stood outside, locked out of my own home. From the living room window, I saw movement. Curtains swayed. The faint glow of the TV flickered, and there they were. My husband Daniel, relaxed on the couch, and his mother, Barbara, perched beside him like a queen on her throne. They weren't rushing to help me. They weren't even opening the door. "Daniel," I shouted, my voice cracking. Another contraction gripped my body, forcing me to bend over the gate. "It's time. The baby's coming. Open the door." Barbara's voice cut through the silence, sharp and cold. "You should go straight to the hospital, Emily. Don't drag Daniel into your mess right now. He needs his rest." Mess? My labor was a mess? I staggered closer, pounding on the door with the flat of my hand. "I'm your wife. This is our child. Please, just let me in until the cab arrives." Daniel finally stood, but instead of rushing to me, he folded his arms across his chest, his tall frame casting a shadow in the dim light. His face, once the face I trusted, was unreadable. "Mom's right," he said flatly. "You'll be fine. Just call an Uber or something. Don't make a scene. Don't make a scene." The world tilted. Pain shot through my abdomen, but it couldn't compare to the knife driving straight through my heart. 12 years of marriage, and this was the man I had chosen to build a life with. 12 years of sacrifices, of biting my tongue when Barbara criticized my cooking, my clothes, my family background. 12 years of loyalty, and this was my reward. Barbara's eyes gleamed as she leaned closer to Daniel. "If she can't handle this on her own, she's not fit to be a mother." The words sank into me like poison. She wanted me gone. She had always wanted me gone. And now, when I was at my most vulnerable, she was making her move. I stumbled back down the porch steps, clutching my belly. The baby kicked violently inside me, as if reminding me what was truly at stake. My phone buzzed weakly in my trembling hand. With blurry vision, I tapped the Uber app. The driver arrived within 10 minutes, though it felt like an eternity. As I lowered myself into the back seat, the driver's concerned eyes met mine in the rearview mirror. "Ma'am, are you in labor?" "Yes," I whispered, my throat raw from holding back tears. He pressed the accelerator, weaving through the empty Texas streets. Each contraction hit harder, leaving me gasping for breath. My hospital bag slipped to the floor, but I didn't care. My mind was consumed by the image of Barbara smirking behind the locked door, Daniel silent beside her. At the emergency entrance of St. Coma, David's medical center, nurses rushed to my side. Within minutes, I was hooked up to monitors, my vitals flashing on the screen. But even as doctors prepared me for delivery, a voice kept echoing in my head. "They locked you out. They chose each other over you. They wanted you to suffer." Hours blurred together, screams, sweat, the sterile smell of antiseptic, and then, through the haze of agony, the cry of new life filled the room. My son. My beautiful, perfect son. I cradled him against my chest, tears streaming freely now. Not from pain, but from determination. Because in that moment, as I looked into his tiny face, I knew something with absolute clarity. I was done being powerless. Done being the outsider in my own marriage. Done letting Barbara dictate my worth and Daniel enforce her cruelty. They thought locking me out was humiliation, but they had no idea that night was the beginning of the end, for them. As dawn broke over Austin, pink light flooding the hospital window, I whispered into my baby's ear, "They tried to shut me out, but soon I'll shut them out of everything they think they control." And with that vow, the war began. The next morning, I sat propped up in the hospital bed, my newborn son swaddled against my chest. Nurses whispered kindly as they checked monitors, but my mind was somewhere else, back at the house where I had begged for help, only to be treated like an intruder. Most women would be sobbing, broken, crushed by the betrayal. But not me. Not anymore. The tears I had shed last night were the last tears Daniel Carter would ever get from me. I wasn't weak. I wasn't hysterical. I was calculating. "Mrs. Carter, do you want me to call your husband? He hasn't checked in yet," a nurse asked softly. I smiled, though it didn't reach my eyes. "No, don't bother. I'll take care of that myself." Because here's the truth. Daniel wasn't my partner. He hadn't been for years. He was his mother's son first, and my husband second, if ever. Daniel Carter was the golden boy of Austin's legal scene. At 38, tall with sharp cheekbones and an easy grin, he could charm anyone in a courtroom. And he did. Clients, judges, juries. But behind closed doors, his charm turned cold, calculated. He had a way of making every problem my fault, every slight my imagination, every betrayal my weakness. When we first met, he was magnetic. I was 23, working part-time at a bookstore, finishing my MBA. He swept in with roses, candlelit dinners, promises of a life I'd never have to worry about. For a while, I believed him. For a while, he made me feel like the center of his world. But then Barbara entered the picture. Barbara Carter, 62, perfectly coiffed, pearls around her neck even when gardening, a woman who believed no one would ever be good enough for her son. She saw me as competition, not family. To her, I was the outsider, the girl from a middle-class background who dared to marry into the Carters' legacy. I will never forget the first words she whispered to me at our engagement dinner, her wine glass trembling in her hand as she leaned close. "Enjoy this while it lasts, sweetheart. Daniel always comes home to his mother." I laughed it off then, naive enough to believe Daniel would defend me, but he never did. If anything, he reinforced her cruelty, always with that same line. "Don't take it so personally, Em. She's just old-fashioned." Old-fashioned? No. Barbara was deliberate. Every insult at Sunday dinners, every time she forgot to invite me to family events, every time she insisted Daniel stay at her house overnight because she needed him. It was all strategy. And Daniel? He chose her. Every single time. Still, nothing compared to what happened last night. Lying there in labor, begging for the man who had vowed to protect me, only to see him lounging with his mother, locking me out like a stranger. That wasn't just neglect, that was war. But instead of screaming or breaking down, I was already rewinding the tape in my mind, remembering all the little signs that had led to this moment. The sudden business trips that never made sense, the late nights at the office, the unexplained charges on our credit card, jewelry, fancy dinners, boutique hotel stays, the whispered phone calls he'd end the moment I entered the room. And then the texts I once glimpsed when he left his phone unlocked. Messages to his mother. "Don't worry, Mom. The house will always stay in the family. Emily thinks she has rights, but she doesn't. She's just here to give me an heir." The words had burned into my brain. Just here to give him an heir. I had wanted to confront him then, but something in me hesitated. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was survival. But that night, I started a quiet plan. I opened a separate bank account under my maiden name. I began funneling small amounts of money from my salary, money Daniel never noticed since he'd barely paid attention to my career. I kept every suspicious receipt, every unexplained withdrawal, every late-night text screenshot. And slowly, brick by brick, I built a wall of evidence. So last night, as I lay in that hospital bed listening to my son's cries, I wasn't thinking about heartbreak. I was thinking about strategy. The door creaked open. Daniel walked in, Barbara trailing behind him like a shadow. Daniel carried a bouquet of cheap flowers, probably picked up at the hospital gift shop. Barbara clutched her designer handbag like she owned the place. "There she is," Barbara said with a tight smile. "Our Emily, how are you feeling?" Her tone was sugar, but her eyes were knives. I didn't answer. Instead, I adjusted the blanket around my baby and kissed his forehead. Daniel cleared his throat. "Look, Em, about last night." "Don't," I cut him off, my voice calm, measured. "You've already said enough." He blinked, clearly expecting me to lash out, to cry, to beg. Instead, I looked him dead in the eye. "I just want you to know something, Daniel. I may have been locked out of the house last night, but don't make the mistake of thinking I don't have keys to everything that matters." Barbara frowned, confused by my composure. Daniel shifted uncomfortably, his lawyer's instincts picking up on something he couldn't quite name. I smiled faintly. "Enjoy your flowers. You're going to need them, for yourselves." And with that, I turned my attention back to my baby. making it clear the conversation was over. Because here's what they didn't know. I wasn't just Emily Carter, the ignored wife, the scapegoat daughter-in-law. I was Emily Carter, MBA, financial analyst, strategist, planner. I wasn't locked out of my life, I was preparing to lock them out of theirs. And soon, very soon, they would realize just how costly their betrayal had been. I used to believe betrayal happened in one brutal moment, a text message, a confession, a slammed door. But the truth? Betrayal creeps in slowly, like water seeping through cracks in a foundation until the whole house collapses. Looking back now, I can see every red flag that pointed to this moment. The locked door while I was in labor wasn't the beginning. It was the culmination of years of smaller betrayals, each one chipping away at my trust, my dignity, and my marriage. The first came the night of our wedding rehearsal dinner. I had chosen a modest Italian restaurant in downtown Austin, cozy and warm, filled with laughter. I was radiant, glowing with excitement about marrying the man I thought loved me. But Barbara? She arrived late, sweeping into the room like she was attending a royal gala. When the waiter asked about wine, she smiled sweetly and said, "Make sure you serve the bride something light. We wouldn't want her to outshine the groom tomorrow." People chuckled nervously. Daniel just shrugged and clinked his glass. I forced a smile, but inside, I felt the sting. That was Barbara's specialty. Dressed up insults, coated in sugar, delivered in front of an audience so I couldn't react without looking petty. And Daniel? He never defended me. Not once. A year into our marriage, things grew worse. Barbara insisted on Sunday dinners at her house, no excuses. Every time she'd criticize something, my hair, my cooking, my job. "Emily, why don't you just quit and focus on giving Daniel children? That's what a good wife does." Daniel would chuckle and pat my hand. "She doesn't mean anything by it," he'd whisper. But she did. Every word was a dagger, and he let her drive it deeper. The worst was Christmas 3 years later. I had spent weeks saving money to buy Barbara a pearl bracelet, thinking maybe, just maybe, she would see my effort and accept me. She unwrapped it at the family gathering, her face lighting up. For 1 second, I felt relief. Then she turned to Daniel and said, "Thank you, sweetheart. You always know just what I like." I froze. She thought he had bought it. And Daniel? He didn't correct her. He just smiled and took the credit while I sat there, humiliated, my chest burning with shame. But the betrayal wasn't just Barbara. No, Daniel had his own collection of sins. 2 years ago, I noticed him working late more often. At first, I believed him. He was a lawyer after all. Long hours came with the job. But then I found a receipt in his jacket pocket, dinner for 2 at a luxury steakhouse on a night he had sworn he was stuck in the office. When I asked, he brushed it off. "Client meeting," he said smoothly. His eyes didn't flinch, his tone calm, like he had rehearsed the line 1,000 times. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering who she was. A client? Or someone else entirely? 6 months later, the answer came in the form of a text message he accidentally left open on his phone. "Can't wait for our next trip. She thinks you're at work again." My hands trembled as I read it. My throat closed up, but I forced myself to breathe. The name at the top was S, just a letter. No full name, no picture. I wanted to scream, to throw the phone at his face, to demand answers, but instead, I set it down quietly and walked into the kitchen, where Barbara was sipping her evening tea. She glanced up, eyes sharp. "You're pale, Emily. Everything all right?" I wanted to tell her what I'd seen, but then I realized the text didn't surprise her. She already knew. Maybe she had even encouraged it. So I smiled faintly and said, "Everything's fine." That night, I opened my own bank account under my maiden name, just in case. From that point on, I started noticing everything. The gym clothes he never sweated in. The sudden interest in cologne he'd never worn before. The way Barbara would smirk when I asked where he was. Once, at Sunday dinner, I overheard her whispering to him in the kitchen. "She's too soft, she won't leave you. Women like her cling no matter what you do." I stood frozen in the hallway, their voices clear. Daniel chuckled. "Exactly. That's why I don't worry. She's useful. She'll give me the air, and then? The words rang in my ears for weeks, but the final straw came one night, when Daniel came home late, his shirt smelling faintly of perfume. I confronted him. "Where were you?" I asked, my voice calm. "At work," he replied without hesitation. I stared at him, searching his face for a flicker of guilt, but there was none. Then, as if to twist the knife, he smirked. Don't start imagining things, Em. You know how emotional you get. Emotional. That was his favorite word, his weapon of choice. Every time I caught him in a lie, every time Barbara humiliated me, every time I tried to stand up for myself, he'd dismiss me as emotional. But the truth, I wasn't emotional. I was observant. And while Daniel thought he was clever, thought I was too weak to fight back, I was building my arsenal. Every receipt, every suspicious transaction, every whispered conversation. I stored it all. Screenshots, copies, evidence tucked away in a locked drawer. Because I knew the day would come when I'd need it. So when Daniel and Barbara locked me out while I was in labor, it wasn't a shock. It was the final confirmation of what I had known for years. They never saw me as family. I was disposable, replaceable, just a means to an end. But what they didn't know was that I had been preparing for this moment all along. I had a separate account. I had legal documents. I had every weapon I needed. And soon I would use them. People assume revenge is impulsive, screaming, smashing dishes, storming out. But real revenge? It's patient. It's deliberate. It's planned so meticulously that by the time your enemy realizes what's happening, it's far too late. And I had been preparing for years. The first step was money. Daniel had always considered finances his domain, as if my MBA and years working as a financial analyst meant nothing. He would wave his hand when I asked about our accounts. Don't worry about it, Em. I've got it under control. But that arrogance was weakness. Every time he deposited his paycheck into our joint account, I quietly moved small amounts into my separate account under my maiden name. Nothing dramatic, just a few hundred here, a few hundred there. Enough to keep suspicion at bay. Over 6 years, that harmless trickle became a river. By the time I went into labor, my private account held over $250,000. Money Daniel didn't even know existed. And the house? That was my masterpiece. 3 years ago, Barbara had pressured me to put her name on the deed for inheritance reasons. She claimed it would keep the property in the family. Daniel, of course, agreed. He wanted to add both of their names. But my father, God bless him, stepped in. He reminded me that the house was purchased using money my parents had gifted me before marriage. Legally, that made it my separate property. And with the right paperwork, I ensured the deed reflected only my name. Daniel signed off without reading, too busy scrolling through his phone. Barbara smirked, thinking she had won, never realizing she had just lost everything. The second step was evidence. I knew if I ever wanted true justice, I couldn't rely on emotions. Courts don't care about tears. They care about proof. So I documented everything. Every late-night work dinner receipt, every suspicious hotel charge, every cruel text message like the one he sent Barbara about me. She's just here to give me the air. I compiled it all into neat folders, categorized by date and type. I even backed it up on a secure cloud drive under an alias. If anything ever happened to me, my attorney had instructions to release it all. Yes, attorney. 6 months ago, I quietly hired a divorce lawyer named Karen Dawson, one of the toughest in Austin. I met her under the guise of consulting on estate planning, but in reality, I was building my arsenal. She had nearly laughed when I slid the evidence across her desk. Emily, this isn't just adultery. This is financial misconduct, emotional abuse, and potentially fraud. You could take him for everything. I remember smiling then, a cold, steady smile. Not everything, just what's mine. And maybe a little extra for the years he wasted. Karen leaned back in her chair, impressed. You've been preparing, haven't you? Yes, I said simply, for this exact moment. The third step was connections. Barbara loved to flaunt her social status, country club luncheons, charity galas, wine tastings. But I had my own network. Colleagues, clients, professional women who respected me. Over the years, I had quietly built a support system Daniel never bothered to notice. When I hinted to a few of them about possible career changes, job offers flowed in. If I needed to walk away from everything tomorrow, I could. And I knew that once the truth about Daniel leaked, the affair, the betrayal, the abandonment during labor, those same circles Barbara cherished, would turn icy. Because society women like Barbara thrive on image, and once her image cracked, she would crumble. The fourth step was timing. You can't strike too early or they'll recover. You can't strike too late, or you'll look weak. No, revenge is about precision. And after last night, after being locked out of my home while contractions tore through me, I knew the timing was perfect. I called Karen from my hospital room. "It's time," I said simply. Her voice sharpened with energy. "Then we move. I'll have the emergency petition ready by morning. Do you want to freeze the accounts now?" "Yes. Every joint account, every credit card. I want him cut off completely." "Done," she said. By noon, Daniel's cards would start declining, his accounts would freeze. The empire he thought he controlled would collapse. The final step was strength, because revenge isn't just legal or financial. It's emotional. You have to stand tall when they expect you to collapse. And when Daniel and Barbara came swaggering into my hospital room with their fake smiles, I didn't cry. I didn't plead. I smiled back. "Enjoy your little victory," I told them calmly, "because soon you'll be locked out too, and unlike me, you won't have a key." Barbara's smirk faltered for the first time. Daniel frowned, confused, his lawyer's instincts sensing something he couldn't quite name. But it didn't matter, because everything was already in motion. That night, as my baby slept peacefully in his bassinet, I sat upright in my hospital bed, laptop open, signing the final digital documents Karen had sent. With a single click, I froze Daniel out of his accounts, blocked his access to the house, and filed the first round of divorce paperwork. He didn't even know yet. But by the time he tried to swipe his card at breakfast tomorrow, he would. And when Barbara realized the house she thought she controlled was legally mine, she would too. I closed the laptop, leaned back, and whispered to my sleeping son, "They tried to lock us out, but I've already locked them out of everything that matters." By the time I was discharged from the hospital 3 days later, everything was in place. My son and I rode home in a black SUV my lawyer had arranged. Not Daniel's car, not Barbara's. I refused to let them play chauffeur to the life they had tried to crush. When we pulled up to the house, Daniel was waiting on the porch, his jaw tight, his phone in his hand. He looked less like the confident attorney I had married and more like a man cornered. Barbara sat beside him, arms crossed, eyes cold. The moment I stepped out, Daniel started barking. "Emily, what the hell did you do? My accounts are frozen. My credit cards are being declined. Do you know how embarrassing it was to have my card rejected at the club this morning?" I adjusted the car seat handle and walked past him without a word. Barbara scoffed. "You think you can treat my son like this? After everything this family has done for you?" I paused at the door, turned slowly, and looked Barbara dead in the eye. "Everything I've done for him, you mean? Because let's be clear, without me, Daniel wouldn't have this house, this lifestyle, or even a reputation left to protect." Daniel's face reddened. "This is going too far. You're acting insane." I laughed softly. "Insane? No, Daniel. Strategic. Everything you thought you controlled now belongs to me, and you have no one to blame but yourself." The first blow came that afternoon. My lawyer, Karen, arrived with documents in hand. Daniel tried to bluster, waving his own phone, muttering about calling his firm. But Karen silenced him with one sentence. "You abandoned your wife while she was in active labor. We have witnesses, timestamps, and even text messages you sent your mother confirming it. Any judge in Texas will shred you in court." Barbara's face drained of color. Daniel sputtered, "That's not what happened." Karen raised an eyebrow. "Do you really want to deny it? Because your neighbor's Ring camera caught the entire scene. Emily begging to be let in, Barbara's voice telling her to take an Uber. It's all there." Barbara gasped. Daniel's eyes widened in horror. Yes, I had already secured the footage. The second blow came when Karen laid out the financial records. "Your Honor," she rehearsed aloud, "we can clearly demonstrate Mr. Carter used joint funds to finance extramarital activities. Dinners, hotels, gifts. Here are the receipts." I watched Daniel's confidence drain with every page. His little secret S wasn't so secret anymore. Barbara's lips tightened into a thin line. "You can't prove," Karen cut her off. "Ma'am, we also have screenshots of your text conversations with your son. The ones where you encouraged him to lie, where you called Emily just a womb." Barbara froze. Daniel turned to her, betrayal flickering in his eyes. "You texted that?" For once, Barbara had no words. The third blow? Social. By the end of that week, word had spread. The Austin legal community is tight-knit, and once whispers of Daniel abandoning his wife in labor hit the circuit, his reputation began unraveling. Judges avoided him. colleagues distanced themselves. Even clients pulled cases, unwilling to risk being associated with the lawyer who left his wife screaming on the porch. Barbara's beloved country club followed suit. One phone call from a board member, and she was politely encouraged to suspend her membership until the family scandal settled down. The humiliation was exquisite, but the final blow was the one that broke them completely. We met in court 2 weeks later for the emergency divorce hearing. I wore a navy suit, hair sleek, posture straight. Daniel arrived rumpled, eyes bloodshot. Barbara trailed behind him, smaller now, shrunken, her pearls doing nothing to hide the cracks in her armor. The judge reviewed the evidence quickly. "Mr. Carter, this is one of the most egregious cases of marital abandonment I've ever seen. Combined with clear financial misconduct and adultery, the ruling is straightforward." My heart pounded as the gavel came down. The house remains solely in Mrs. Carter's name. Mr. Carter's access to joint funds is permanently revoked. Custody of the minor child is awarded exclusively to Mrs. Carter, with Mr. Carter permitted supervised visitation pending review. Daniel's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Barbara gripped his arm, whispering furiously, but it was useless. The courtroom had witnessed their downfall. When the session adjourned, Daniel stormed up to me. "You ruined me." I met his gaze calmly. "No, Daniel, you ruined yourself. I just held up the mirror." Barbara hissed. "You'll regret this, Emily. No man will want a woman who destroys her own family." I stepped closer so only she could hear. "I didn't destroy a family, Barbara. I protected one. Mine. My son will never grow up thinking this kind of cruelty is normal, and that's something you can never undo." For the first time, Barbara's eyes flickered, not with rage but with fear. That night, I walked through my house, my son cradled in my arms. The house was quiet, peaceful. No Daniel, no Barbara, no poisonous voices echoing through the halls. I set my baby down in his crib, kissed his tiny forehead, and whispered, "We're free." I poured myself a glass of wine and stepped out onto the porch, the same porch where I had once been locked out in agony. But now I held the keys. Not just to the house, to my future, to my power. Daniel had lost his reputation. Barbara had lost her social crown, and I had gained everything they tried to steal from me. Dignity, freedom, and a fresh start. People always expect revenge to be loud, but mine was quiet, precise. Ruthless Daniel thought he had locked me out, but in the end, I locked him out of his home, his finances, his career. And Barbara? She thought she could control the narrative. Instead, she became a cautionary tale whispered behind manicured hands at luncheons she would never attend again. As I watched the Texas sun set beyond the horizon, my son's soft breaths filling the air behind me, I smiled. This wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning. Because empowerment doesn't come from waiting for someone to save you. It comes from saving yourself and making sure those who underestimated you never forget the cost. So my wonderful friends, that's how the story closes. And if you're still here with me right now, I know something in this journey touched your heart. The Stoics said, "The obstacle is the way," and Emily's pain became her power. Remember, healing doesn't come from waiting, it comes from choosing. If this spoke to you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because stories like these remind us we are stronger than betrayal.